I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. Today I'm joined by Andrea Wood. Andrea describes herself as a communication leader, but I think she is much more than that, as I'm sure you'll agree after listening to her experience, which is absolutely fascinating. Starting with a role within South Africa, assisting the Nelson Mandela campaign, being in Berlin when the wall came down, to leading multiple organisations through significant change. I'm delighted to introduce Andrea to you now. Okay, well, hi Andrea, thank you very much for joining us today.
Most welcome.
We're right in the middle of the lockdown in the UK, as you know. Yeah. So how's it affected you, and how are you getting on?
What it's given me is an opportunity to think about my personal health and well-being, and to do things that I just wouldn't have time for otherwise. I love to sew, I love to cook, and I love to write. So it's given me the time to do all of those things, which is really valuable, to be refreshed and be better and go back into the workplace at a later stage. Feeling good about oneself.
Yeah, I think it's very important, isn't it? And I think a lot of people that I've been speaking to, as well as organisations that I've been speaking to, it's a time to reset and reflect, and then and yes, absolutely survive what's going through, but actually get ready to thrive in the future. And that's what a lot of organisations are starting to do, and a lot of individuals are doing as well.
Yeah, but that is on a very I would say very sort of selfish or personal level, how it's also affected me in terms of the community around me. I live in a block of flats, and there's not just one block, there's sort of 15 or 16 of them in the Canary Wharf area. It's sort of, tall building town.
Yes.
But it's to see how people have responded in this crisis, to helping others, to being more community-minded, to being kinder, to finding ways of being happy and pleasing other people. And for me to find ways where I can help other people has been really, it's been a very, very positive experience in many ways.
Great, and hopefully that will carry on as well as we go back into some whatever normality looks like in the future. Hopefully this sort of, as you say, this much more sort of community spirit and community focus will continue.
And I think in terms of change and business and what we're talking about today, I don't think there could be, change is about disruption in business.
Yes.
There couldn't be anything more ultimate in terms of disruption than this pandemic, because it affects everything. It's not just about change to business and the financial aspect of it. It's not just about impacts to markets and how they operate and whether businesses have got enough cash flow to continue or not. But it's about people and their genuine well-being. And it's not just about looking after the well-being of employees because a company wants to, or its ethos. It's become mandatory.
Absolutely.
And they have to accept that. And then it's about how we change our ways of working. We have to work online. How does that impact and change the processes that the organizations employ? I mean, you couldn't get anything more ultimate in terms of
disruption. No, absolutely. I always talk, for change to be successful, there has to be a burning platform. And there's never been a bigger burning platform than what we're going through at the moment.
Yes, the entire building's burning, and how we respond in terms of leadership and in terms of communication, that is the ultimate test.
Absolutely. Well, I was keen to get you on the podcast because I think your sort of focus on the communication aspects during change and the taking people through the process of change is surely something that's going to add to the overall conversation of these podcasts. So I was keen. But before we sort of get into the detail, can you provide the listeners with a little bit of background on yourself?
Well, I've been in transformation projects and working on change programs and focusing in on excellent communications for about 10 years now. But my interest in change and communications in particular go way, way back. You can probably hear from my accent that I'm South African born, although I am a British citizen through my parents. And that was an important factor, actually, whilst living in South Africa. I did my university degree in political science and international law, and went on further to do a master's in communications and negotiation. And that was something that helped me in my first role. And my first career choice was as a diplomat, working very oddly as a British citizen for the South African Foreign Office. But that was very particularly done because the South African Foreign Office in the days of apartheid and in the run-up to the 94, what they called rainbow elections, was the first democratic elections in South Africa and the release of Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. And it was decided quite some years before 94, that Mandela would become president of the country, and that he needed to be released from prison and groomed. But in that run-up to that process, South Africa needed to reopen all of the locked down routes of communication that it had gone through because of apartheid and sanctions. And so there were 20, I think it was 21 of us with foreign nationalities, foreign passports, so we were able to travel, were taken in and trained at the Foreign Office to go and reopen these routes of dialogue. And my particular portfolio was sport and youth activities and obtaining South Africa's return to the Olympic Games. And amongst other things, I ended up spending 4 years in Germany doing just that, working with the International Olympic Committee and the whole ethos. And I was in Frankfurt at a time when the Berlin Wall came down.
Right.
And so the similarities between East Germany and the disadvantaged communities, particularly in the areas of sport and youth activities, with South Africa's disadvantaged communities were massive. And it was the most incredible time of change for an entire country, not just South Africa, but for Germany as well. And that's where my interest in exceptional communication and engagement of audiences in the process of change became of massive interest and massive importance to me personally.
So I did that. That work that you did on that in both of those situations. Then, what were the key things and the key themes that you've taken that's influenced the work that you do today?
I think the key things would be exceptional communications, making sure that you really understand your audience, making yourself fully aware of how people are impacted by the changes around them, and how that in turn impacts the way that they work and how they're able to deliver. And so communications becomes the basis of understanding who you're dealing with, how they're impacted by change, how the results of change will be delivered through that process of the people involved with it. And it underpins training, data gathering, research. It underpins all of those aspects that are absolutely vital for change. So understanding who it is that you're dealing with and how to communicate with them, so that they not only hear the message, but are able to understand it and act upon it. And they're able to provide feedback, data, research, information back into the system. So, and I suppose that if there was one key lesson that I learned, and that was communication isn't about speaking, it's about listening. Mm. And so
that's sort of the old adage, isn't it, that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them in
that ratio. Absolutely. Most important thing. So yes, I would say that communication and understanding who you're dealing with is vital.
Okay, and one of the things that we talk about quite a lot on these podcasts is just how stressful the whole sort of transformation process can be for everybody who's involved in it. That could be because as you go through change, people don't necessarily like change. They always start to think about what's the impact upon me. So what role do you think communication can play in relieving that stress?
We all talk a lot about one of the key factors in change being resistance to that change, particularly in the leadership arena, where people are thinking up new ways and new strategies for dealing with business. I think that change has become the only constant in business now. Technology, the way we communicate, the ability and speed with which we are able to communicate nowadays, creates a scenario where change happens very quickly, and it needs to. So for me, the concept of resistance to change is a little outmoded. I think we need to have a balance between acceptance of the reality that change is happening, and not think about how we can resist it, but rather a balance between that acceptance and confidence to innovate. And that's not just about leadership anymore. It's not about preparing leadership to go through a change. It's about preparing everybody to try and accept and to try and come up with new ways of dealing with change. And that's where communication comes in. The more information we provide, the more feedback we get in and understand how people are processing that information in a positive way, and we're able to support them and underpin their ability to innovate and accept and innovate within change is what will help to de-stress.
But there is a process, isn't it? I know people call it the change curve, different people call it different things, but we can start to predict how people are going to respond to change input, shall we say, or events.
Yes.
What phases do you think what are the key phases in your experience, and how do people adapt to those different phases?
I think that those key changes are. I developed a sort of a pendulum, if you can say, of change phases through my own experience and my own knowledge of change programs that I've gone through in the past. And that pendulum goes through a series of fairly standard, like the change curve, and like a lot of, you get a lot of textbooks that will talk about change phases that go, the 7 steps to change, etc. But and they're right, because there are certain accepted and normal phases that we would go through. Some of those would be acceptance of a change, an item that's going to change, acceptance of reality, then an understanding of that reality, and then possibly, and I'm really simplifying here because I think there would be some more disruptions to those phases and those processes as we go along. But then there would be a period of accepting support, understanding of the situation, why the change is happening, what is the change for, what are the outcomes, what is the vision, and what is that individual's role in helping that process to be delivered. And then there's a period of confidence where people feel confident. They know, I know what my role is, I know what I need to do, I know where we're going, we're achieving something, we're making progress. And that comes to a point where people start to innovate. They're that confident about what they're delivering on a day-to-day basis that they're able to think one day ahead, 1 week ahead, 1 month ahead. Yeah. And they're able to make what I call confident innovations.
I suppose, presumably, though, people go through those phases at different speeds. So how do you, can you give me some examples of how you've sort of supported organisations through that and taking people who are going at different speeds through that process?
I think that's where storytelling perhaps comes into play to begin with, where you need to give a reason for change. You need to tell the story, give people purpose around why they're going through a particular process of change. So from a communications point of view, I'll provide them with a narrative. What is that burning platform that we talked about earlier? Why is this happening? What do we hope to achieve with that? And I work really closely with leadership to be able to develop that story. But then I also work with people on the ground because I want to understand how it's going to impact them and what they think will occur. And we develop a story and some really key messages around what is the reason for this change? How is it going to impact us? How is it going to benefit us? And who's impacted and why? And that narrative starts off at a very high level, very strategic level, but it develops into a very personal story for individuals on the ground within a business, no matter how big or small the business is. Develops into a very personal thing. That would be the starting point for me, but that develops into how do we support these individual roles? Do they need training? Do we need to develop training modules? Is that story about big strategic business change, an operating model change? Is it about cultural change? Is it about implementation of a new system, an ERP system? Is it just an IT change? Is it about collaboration? Is it about developing centers of excellence or setting up a new system of shared services? And all of those things take a balance of what I call science and sensibility. Yeah. The sensibility side is, what do people need to know? What do they want to know? What helps them to do their job better? And that develops into the science part of it of, what do they absolutely need to have in terms of tools in communication? Do they need training systems? Do they need access to documentation? Do they need to learn how to push new buttons? And how do we control that? And how do we provide that? I shouldn't say control, that's the wrong word, but how do we provide that? And we provide that support.
Okay. And do you typically work alongside a program director, or do you run the programs yourself? Do you work for the organization or not the organization? Obviously, you work within the organization, but do you work on the program capacity or on the operational capacity, on the operational side?
It's a combination of all of it.
And what's yeah. Rather than saying do you, then what do you find the most effective?
What do I find the most effective? I think the most effective is working with a program director, somebody that is or a transformation lead, if I'm not the transformation lead myself. Yeah. But the usual aspect is to have somebody that has an overall helicopter view of what is changing in the business and how it impacts various areas. But as far as communication is concerned, it needs to tap into every part of the business. It needs to tap into the board for key strategic decisions and a key strategic view of where the business is going. It needs to absolutely be involved with operations and how they roll out their business. I mean, there could be a recent example would be, I worked with GK in aerospace, and they were reorganizing their entire business design in terms of people in order to become more collaborative. Mm-hmm. But they wanted to, at the same time, deploy a lean operating model.
Right.
Two very, very different things.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, absolutely.
Two very different messages to people on the ground. So I needed to have a finger in every pie, discussing with HR about how that impacted people, talking with finance about how that impacted their everything from procurement to sales and marketing. How was operations affected? And also talking to the transformation team and being involved with the transformation team from a strategic point of view. So the most effective way, in order to answer your question, for me is to work to a transformation directive, yeah, but within a very collaborative, a business partnering mode of operation with each and every piece of the business, no matter whether they're involved in transformation or not, or at what stage of transformation they're in.
Right.
And very often, businesses, in my experience, have asked me to come in and look at a particular work stream. And within 6 weeks, they're going, this isn't working just in a work stream, is it? And I'm going, no, we need to have fingers in bigger pies. And they've gone, go for it.
Yeah, I think that is so accurate, isn't it? In terms of if you try to run any program in isolation of the rest of the business, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
You've got to be cognizant of what's going on. You've got to be cognizant of the issues that the rest of the business are facing, and there's a sell into the rest of the business of the benefits of this change, whatever the change is. What's the impact upon their part of their business?
Yes.
And you said bringing the whole organisation on that journey is so important.
It's the repercussions of a small piece of change in one area, even if it's just sort of, for example, a finance implementation. I did something like that with Rickard Benkiza. They wanted to implement a new shared services model of a new ERP for finance only.
Right.
And the impact that it had on so many people in 164 markets worldwide was phenomenal. And yeah, interesting, fantastic, and marvelous. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been involved in something similar, and although the change, as you say, relatively straightforward, in my case was being driven by a technology team that just saw the technology change aspect of it. But they were changing the way that they were changing the procure to pay process.
Yeah.
And as you say, it wasn't quite as big as in whatever number it was, big number that you said in terms of global markets. But this was they had 8 UK based facilities, and then a number of European based facilities, and this technology was changing across all 12 areas, and it had absolutely impact on every office and every facility. Because every time they wanted to buy something or procure something, they had to go through this new process. And equally, every supplier, wherever they were in the world, had to adopt this new process. And for something that was almost, from a technology perspective, a relatively simple change, mushroomed into a significant business change, process change, and a massive communication effort required to make it successful.
And it can be mind-blowing and so exciting, and stressful, incredibly stressful. If it's stressful for somebody like me who knows what's going to happen with the change, imagine what it's like for those people that are impacted by it. I mean, it's just, and that's, for me, at the heart of change. Yes, we change things in business to make businesses better, to make them smoother, to make them more fluid, more adaptable and flexible, and be able to deliver better results. But for me, from a communications perspective, it's the people. And if you can't take the people along with you in a good and positive way, you are never going to be able to deliver what you need to at the end of it.
Yeah. Well, generally, do you believe that some of the communication aspects of change, it's a science, or is it just a straightforward methodology?
Well, what I said before, it's that mixture between science and sensibility. It's taking common sense about how you would deal with people, but at the same time there is a science and a method and a route to communicating properly. For me, I always have a look at the 4 key things: what, who, how, and when. And it's, what do you want to say? Who do you want to say it with? And I don't very purposely don't say who do you want to say it to, because it's communication is 2-way. And then it's a how. If you understand who you're communicating with, you'll be able to understand the methods that you employ in order to distribute that information and obtain the feedback. And then the when, more important than anything, actually, is when. How proactive can you be? how much information can you provide upfront? And so I would say the science lies in that, in the what, who, how, and when, and the sensibility. For me, it's years and years of experience and practice in that, and it's something that the Germans, I learned very quickly while spending time in Germany, that it's something to do with the feeling in your fingertips. It's called Fingerspitzengefühl.
Right. Okay.
A mouthful, but it is. It's something that you can't learn in a book.
Right. Interesting. And how important is messaging through different media? This is because people react and respond in different ways, don't they? Whether they hear it, how they feel it, how they see it, and so how important is that?
Absolutely vital to use as many different ways of communicating as possible, because people have different acceptance levels and capabilities. They have different tools of receiving information, and again, that was a lesson I learned very, very clearly at Argos. How do you communicate with 50,000 people to whom you had no direct access, and they don't have access to technology per se? An example of the route that we used, we thought, a lot of these people in the stores are under the age of 30. They're bound to have their own mobile phones, and although we can't just access their mobile phones, why don't we provide them with an app that they could choose to download if they wanted to? And we had 5,000 people take it up on the first day.
Right.
So, finding different ways and being a bit savvy, being a bit creative in the way that you communicate, but using as many methods as possible. Absolutely. You can never say things too many times.
As long as it's a consistent message.
Absolutely. Consistency is key. Thank you for bringing that up.
No, again, we've all been in situations, haven't we, whereby one part of the business is saying one thing and another saying the other, and suddenly you've lost it. You've completely lost the whole mandate that you had to drive this change through, because people pick up on inconsistencies so quickly.
And that's where, when I was talking about creating the original narrative, those key messages, those are absolutely vital. They need to be bought into, they need to be consistent, they need to be nailed down to not only say what it is that you want to say, but they need to be bought into and accepted as the key story. And they should be just the one story for consistency. Yeah.
Good. So I ask this question all the time to everyone that's involved, but if there's one thing, just sort of one takeaway today for people to consider, what would you want that to be?
Listening. A key executive at a very well-known media institution said once, and I will never forget it, he said once at a conference, give your people a damn good listening to, and then act on what they say.
Right.
And that's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Andrea. I think that was really insightful. I think we've had different people on the podcast so far with different experiences. We've not focused as much on communication previously, so I think it's a different perspective. But it's about building all of the building blocks and putting all the building blocks together. So I think that was really, really helpful. We do occasionally get some questions coming in. Would you be happy to answer them if I collate them?
Of course, absolutely. More than happy to do that. Given those, we have enough time for questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and hopefully speak to you soon.
And you take care.
Once again, that was great, Andrea. Thanks for your time. If you think you have a transformation story that you'd like to share with our audience, please feel free to contact me on the number or email contained in the show notes below. See you in a couple of weeks.